My name is Debbie Wallenberg. I'm an occupational therapist, and I have been working in the schools for the past 36 years. When I first started working in the schools, we were a self-contained school. We provided services for children from 3 to 21. It was a segregated school where all those services were provided in that setting. Over time, we have moved the children out of that segregated school, and they've been mainstreamed back into their regular schools as much as possible. Services were initially provided in a pull-out method where we would take the students out of the classroom and work with them in a one-on-one setting to work on those specific skills that we saw as deficit areas. As I have provided services in a more of an inclusive model, I still continue to do those assessments to look at where those deficits are, but by being within the classroom and working with the classroom teacher, you see how those impact the child's ability to function on a minute by minute, day by day, week by week progression. And I think the value of me being in the classroom has changed, because instead of pulling them out and doing the 30 minutes of magic a week, it's much more beneficial to push in so that the aides and the classroom teacher can do the same techniques and the same modifications that I would have done in more of a pull-out situation. So rather than 30 minutes of OT a week, they're now getting OT techniques throughout the entire week. So there's more carryover and more consistency looking towards that independent functioning within the classroom. Being in a more segregated setting versus a more inclusive setting is the opportunities to have typical peers as role models, which has been wonderful. And I used to pull the students out more, so they would come to me, and we always used to laugh that we'd do our special magic, and then bring them back to the classroom. But now I have the wonderful opportunity of working in this early childhood setting where I am almost always pushing into the classrooms, which gives me the opportunity to see how my students are different than the typical peers and how I can best make modifications for them in that typical classroom. It also allows me opportunities to work with the adults one-on-one. So sometimes those aha moments that come up, you can just have a quick, oh, this was a great modification, and you could do this all the time. So it's a great opportunity to do consultation and stuff at the same time. We have what's called PLC, so professional learning community and that sort of thing, and we have opportunities to talk during that. But also, if I'm doing a group or that sort of thing, I can make comments to the one-to-one aides at that point, because I can see an activity that's going on where I can create more independence or better regulation in that environment. And then afterwards, we can say what went well, what didn't go well, and then how we can change it for the next time so that the whole group goes better and can impact the child on a day-to-day basis. My goals, I used to write totally separate goals than the classroom teacher, but as a related service provider now, I really try to embed, I talk with the classroom teacher and I say, what is impacting this child the most significantly? And then we write a goal collaboratively together. So oftentimes at the early childhood level, one of the most challenging things for our students is, particularly when they initially arrive into our program, is just that emotional regulation piece and the ability to transition throughout their day. So I work with the classroom teacher, and we try to build things into the schedule so that that child can function the most independently as possible. Also, if they say that they can't, can't complete the morning routine or something well, what we can do is we sit down and we write a goal as far as increasing the number of prompts that they need to complete that routine. And then we talk about all the strategies that we're going to use to help them to be more independent. And then oftentimes some of those students will have a one-to-one assistance, and then I can work with that one-to-one instructional assistant as far as how to make that child the most independent as possible. And it's not necessarily doing everything for them. I always tell them my goal is to fade you away and that sort of thing. So it might start off with hand over hand assist, but then what we want to do is to say, oh, we're going to give assistance at the wrist, and then we're going to give assistance at the elbow, and then we might give a tactile tap cue, or we might start just to go to a visual schedule and that sort of thing. And so to bring those people on board, and then we also have data sheets and that sort of thing. So they're documenting the amount of data that, or amount of assistance that they're giving for that particular child to be as independent as possible and what point we're at. So really, oftentimes the teacher or the instructional assistant is the one collecting the data, and then I will go back and double check and make sure that, yes, in fact, they're generalizing that skill. To sit down with the teachers and the aides and to make sure that you have time for collaboration and that sort of thing. But really listening, I mean, we do an evaluation and we can say, well, they have delays with the fine motor and that sort of thing, or they have delays with the sensory regulation. But really what you want to do is to see how those delays are impacting that child to function independently within the classroom setting. And then sitting down with the team and collaborating as far as how we're going to make modifications, how we're going to set up the environment so that that child can be as independent as possible, and what accommodations they need, and then how we're going to provide those accommodations. As far as documenting service minutes and that sort of thing, I find that I tend to provide more minutes in the more inclusive model. I do a push-in service where I service the whole classroom. And when I service the whole classroom, it really gives you a wonderful opportunity to see how your students are functioning in that larger setting rather than the one-on-one setting, which you might see with a different pull-out model. Since I write the goals and that they're really embedded into the classroom structure, it's much easier to take data that way. If I have a specific goal as far as dressing or something like that, I might have a data sheet that's in that area, or that the aide or the classroom teacher could take data, and then I would go back and double check on that to make sure, in fact, that's where they're at, and then how I want to modify it based on where they're functioning at that time. So they're doing a great job with hand-over-hand assistance, but now we want to start fading that assistance to the wrist or the elbow or tap on the shoulder or a visual verbal cue. Same thing with my kids, like independent feeding and that sort of thing. Providing the equipment that they need so that they can be as independent as possible with a suction bowl and a deviated spoon so that they can grasp it better. And then how to fade those cues is always of greatest concern because we're looking towards independent functioning. I can see a wonderful benefit of having some of my inclusion students in a typical early childhood classroom. I have one child in particular who is very physically impaired, and he's in a wheelchair. And prior to his arrival, we had a lot of behavior problems in the classroom with the kids being highly competitive and just not as nice to each other or thoughtful as far as helping each other out or doing some of those things. When this particular child started into the program, suddenly some of our most challenging kids became our biggest helpers. So they had the opportunity to be a leader with that child and to help him to be more independent. And he has wonderful verbal skills, so he could tell them thank you, and he could tell them what he needed. And it really turned around the whole climate of the entire classroom. And we've told the parents over and over again, thank you so much for sharing him with us, because he has made such a difference and he has such a joy to have in the class. He's so happy to be in there. The kids are so happy to help him, and they see themselves as big helpers because they can help him. So he has actually helped a lot of our behavior problem kids demonstrate more mature and appropriate behavior by having him within the classroom.